indulge me for a second. We got to begin week 5 with a little quick story. The story goes back 2 years, almost 2 years exactly. The date was March the 12th, 2020. And I was in this room. And that was the last time that I stood in this room. And it was March the 12th, 2020. And I asked the students that afternoon, it was 12 noon, and jokingly, I asked the class, your peers, 2 years prior to you folks, I said jokingly, I said, show of hands, who thinks we're not going to be in this room next week? And nobody raised their hand. And those folks were just as smart as you, future doctors and medical practitioners of the universe. And nobody believed we were going to not be in class the next week. And as I was driving to my next class, I had a class at Humber College that afternoon. Then the world started to go to hell. 2 years ago. And I have not been back in this room since. But now, look at us all, ladies and gentlemen, students of NFS 302. We are here despite a global pandemic, despite protests at Queen's Park, despite bad weather, despite being 9 a.m. in the morning. There's like, how many of us are here? 40 maybe? Something like that. We got another 40-something listening in on Zoom. We are back. I think it is well-deserved. Give yourselves a round of applause for hanging in there for these 2 years. You were young, wide-eyed first-year university students. Is that right? Or were you in your second year? First or second year. And this is the world you've had to deal with. It's not easy. It is not easy. It is not easy. But yet here we are. So I'm very glad to be back. First time in this classroom in 2 years. I'm very, very glad to be back. I'm glad to have you here. So here's how we're going to do this. I'm going to deliver this lecture as I've always done. And there's a few dozen people who are listening in on Zoom. I'm also recording the lecture. So one way or another, you'll get a recording of this posted somehow. I believe Zoom is recording it. I don't know what's the best way for you to do it, what you prefer, but I have an audio recording. We have the Zoom recording. That's another thing I think that has changed because of this pandemic. I think you're always going to have now recordings of lectures available somehow. That the cat is out of the bag, and I don't think students are ever going to go back to. Like having a lecture delivered once and lost into the ether. These are always going to be made available, I think, somehow. So I'm going to do that for you somehow. I don't know what exactly yet. I have a recording. We have Zoom. Technology is not my forte, but I'll make it available to you somehow. Okay. So without further ado, let's get started about the course itself. This is the topic we're going to tackle here in week number 5. The title of today's lecture is all about fluids. Before we get started, though, let me just give you, like I would usually do, I would get ready for some things that are upcoming. I'll open up if anybody has any questions now that we're all live here together. But I wanted to talk about the midterm. So next week, we're going to have a midterm. The midterm is exclusively online. That was the best practice as decreed by the powers that be, and it's probably true. So it's going to be available online exclusively. It's going to be multiple choice only. Let's settle with 45. I'll make that announcement official here this morning. I'll come up with 45 multiple choice questions on the first 5 weeks of content, plus the 4 readings. And there might be 4 to 6 questions out of the readings. The rest of the 45 multiple choice will be from weeks 1 through 5 lecture content. And that'll be available next week, starting at 9 a.m. It'll be available to access, and there'll be a window of some kind where you can access it. I don't know, like 9 to 5 type thing, maybe. Okay, and that'll be the midterm. Any other questions, folks? We can now interact with each other. It is possible to interact with other human beings. Any questions about anything so far in the course or life in general? You all got, yes? How am I doing today? I'm doing the best I can. Isn't that an easy world we're living in? And you know that, like you folks have had a hard university experience. My heart goes out to you, but we got to plow through. I think I'm doing okay. I hope you are too. All right, so folks, that's the upcoming in this course. Next week, 9 a.m. We're not going to be in this room. There'll be a midterm exam available next week. Okay. All right, then. Without further ado, let's start talking about the content then, shall we, of week number 5. All about fluids is the title, folks, of this lecture. We're going to talk about all kinds of fascinating things, maybe debunk some myths as well. Maybe might blow your mind on some of these topics, get you to think about them in ways you never thought about before. Because there's some of the stuff we're going to talk about, like, for example, dehydration we'll talk about, because that's really, really bad, right? Right? That's terrible. Dehydration, that sounds terrible. Is it though? Is it this demonic monster it's made out to be? We'll see. We'll get there. But we are going to talk about dehydration. Nobody talks about this thing. You folks might know a bit about it because you're all so smart, but nobody knows about overhydration. They don't talk about it as being a serious problem. Maybe it is a big problem. We'll talk about that too. How about this question? One of the million-dollar questions in sports nutrition. You're asked this by your friends on the street, your cousins, and all these people who know you're studying this subject matter. Are sports drinks any good? We will answer that question as well under the topic of nutrition during exercise, because sports drinks really, that's what I'm talking about mostly when we're talking about nutrition during exercise. So these are the topics we're going to talk about today. Should be a fun morning, I hope. And as I always do, I'm going to start you off with some background stuff to set the stage how important this topic is about fluids, and maybe give you some examples of nonsense about fluids that exist in the world. Anyway, people who don't even know about this stuff are interested. Look at this quote, not by a sports scientist. I have nothing to offer but blood, toil, tears, and sweat. Who said that? Anyone know? How about if I gave you a bonus mark on your midterm exam? Would anyone know? I cannot give you bonus marks, by the way. That's frowned upon. But I can give you this. How about this? If anyone knows the answer, I will give you something more valuable than a bonus mark. You will get my respect. Anyone? Too late? Too late. Winston Churchill said this. Sweat. So we are going to talk in depth about sweat this morning, ladies and gentlemen. And even Winston Churchill knew the importance of this, knew nothing about sports science or exercise. How about this one? This is a great book too, by the way. You can check this out. Look at the title of this book. Other Minds. The Octopus, the Sea, and the Deep Origins of Consciousness. My goodness. But this is a good quote to set the stage for how important this topic is. And two things, actually. These two things here, salt and water. So as the author says, the chemistry of life is an aquatic chemistry. We can get by on land only by carrying huge amounts of salt and water around with us. So just to set the stage, and again, from our evolutionary history, we came out of the ocean, right? And the only way we can get by is by carrying around, think about it that way, a piece of the ocean with us. Questions? I don't know how to do that. I think I do know how to do it, actually. 1 second. This one? How do you know all this? Is that it? Do they need the slides? They hear my voice. They could have them. They're on Quirkus, right? They like them. They like to have them, though. Is that right? That's okay. Just in case, I tell you, this is the pandemic has changed education, honestly. Think about when I was a student and you had to go to a class at a certain time, and if you missed it, that was it. You had to ask your buddy to get notes from him. You sat in your desk with a pencil, took notes what the prof was saying. Think about that. It wasn't that long ago. What am I doing? My face? Is that what you're saying? This thing? It's a good thing I know about fluids because I don't know anything about technology. I think we're all right. Okay, that's good. Anyway, what is this talking? Dennis Collier. This thing? No? Just press it? Pull it? I had a pencil and paper, folks, when I was your age. I had a pencil and a piece of paper. All right. I think we're doing great. My goodness, this technology is unbelievable. Think we're good? Okay, yeah, anyway, so there's my quote about the importance of what it is that we're carrying around with us. All right, next slide. What the hell? Now you've ruined it. I'm like, what? We might get through yet. All right, let's see if this works. Let me see. Oh, it does work. Okay. All right. Sharing my screen, 38 people. 40 something now here, 50 something. Folks, we're rolling here. All right, to make it as real world as possible, as you know, I tried to do in my YouTube videos filmed in my living room 11 o'clock at night. Here's 2 case studies I'm going to get you to ponder before we get to the end of the lecture today. On the topic that I mentioned, talking about these 2 things, dehydration and overhydration, and if one is important and if one is not important and if one doesn't get enough play. I'll just give you these 2 case studies. You can think about what the outcomes might be. More story time. All right, first story is of this individual. His name is Pablo Valencia, and he was a gold prospector. So he was out in the Yuma Desert, okay, 1906, way before Zoom. He knew nothing about Zoom. He was a gold prospector in the Yuma Desert, 40 years old, 70 kilograms. So Pablo rides out from camp, 1906, no cell phones either, by the way. Rides out from camp, 56 kilometers on horseback, and then he gets lost. Okay, his horse runs away. He had with him 7.6 liters of water in a canteen, and now Pablo is without a horse, lost in the Yuma Desert, 1906, with 7.6 liters of water to drink. What happens to Pablo, do you think? What happens? I'm not going to tell you what happens to Pablo yet. We'll get back, but that's the situation. Imagine Pablo finding himself in this arid, dry, hot environment with limited fluids. So that's one thing to consider. We're also going to consider the situation of Cynthia Lucero. More modern day stuff going on here. Cynthia she's a PhD student, actually doing her PhD on the psychology of marathon running. That was her thing, and she was interested in marathons. So she you got to win, you got to qualify to do the Boston Marathon in 2002. So she's going to run the Boston Marathon in 2002. She had done one prior marathon and her time was 5 hours and 19 minutes. Is that good? You can do a marathon in 5 hours and 19 minutes. Is that good? What's the answer? Well, if you finish a marathon at any time, that's good. It's an impressive feat. But she's not winning anything, right? That 5 hours, 19, you're nowhere near elite. You're a driven personality to even think about doing it, but she's not going to win anything. 5 hours, 19, that's a long time to be out on a running course. Air temperature that day was 11 degrees, also of importance. And what did Cynthia have? She had whatever fluid was available with her on the course or carrying on herself. And if anyone has done any kind of a road race around the world these days, the fluid available is, shall we say, abundant. You have these volunteers and they're reaching out with waters and Gatorades and all this sports drinks and all kinds of stuff. Plus she could have whatever she carried with her. And she probably had one of those ridiculous Batman utility belts, that people buy these days. You go for your 5K run and you got your gel and you got your walk iPad and you got all this stuff on the belt. You don't need any of that stuff. But she probably had it with her. The moral of the story is fluid is readily available. Okay, so she's got all kinds of fluid to drink as she gets ready to do the Boston Marathon in 2002. What happens to Cynthia? I'm not going to tell you yet, as I told you, but I'll end the story here. I'll leave it here with a cliffhanger. One of these 2 individuals doesn't make it. And with all due respect, because they're both real-life human beings that lived once upon a time, one of them dies. One of them does not. We'll get back and we'll see what was the situation with Pablo and Cynthia. Okay, let's get into the nuts and bolts here of talking about fluid and its vital importance to certainly your health, but also particularly to sports performance. You might even say it's the most important of all nutrients. Put it this way, folks. If you're going to screw one up, okay, if in your advice to a client or to yourself personally, No other nutrient, not carbs, not protein, not fat, has such catastrophic and immediate consequences if you get it wrong. So don't get the fluid wrong. Here's all the stuff it does. That's a small list. You have all kinds of stuff. What's the most important function of fluid, though, as it relates to sports performance? I've said I'm not going to tell you that yet either. You got to wait a few slides. But it does have one particularly vital function in exercise performance that we're going to spend most of the lecture talking about. How about this if you're talking about sports performance? In total, like you are half water. Think about that. As I tried to illustrate with my quote from the Octopus book, you're basically a bag of salt water, largely. That's what you are, which is somewhat disturbing to put it that way, but that's true. Even muscle tissue, you think about muscle as being somewhat, let's just dry. 70% of your muscle tissue is water. So all kinds of implications for fluid as it relates to exercise performance. And speaking of that last one there, all right, think about this. We're going to take a quick tangent to talk about just some of the nonsense about fluid in the world. Keeping that last point in mind, that even your muscle tissue, for goodness sake, is like 70% water. All right, follow along with this. This is good stuff, folks. All right, here was a study done a few years ago about this supplement called Morph, trademark. That's very important that it is trademarked. And what is it? It's one of these, I call them, it's like a potion, like a witch's brew of all kinds of things, beta-alanine, arginine, creatine, all kinds of stuff you put together. So you can trademark it now, right? And you say, I've invented this thing called Morph. All these ingredients are of the exact right proportions. And then if you're trying to sell it, you can even say, I even got like a study in a reputable scientific journal to illustrate how good Morph is. So, and you set it up, looks very nice. You get a pre and post and a placebo in here. So here's what happens. The group that took the Morph supplement, so they measured with the DEXA scan their muscle growth, pre and post. And what did they find? Look at the conclusion here. Morph leads to significantly increased lean mass in the arms. Put that on your label, on your commercials, and you can sell this stuff to all the bodybuilder dudes of the world. Increase mass in my arms, my goodness. Sign me up. So say the bodybuilders. However, if you look a little bit closer, there's some serious flaws in this, which is DEXA reads water as part of your lean muscle tissue. So yes, they gained in lean mass, but as I just told you, 70% of your muscle tissue is water. That's one problem. Also, I would question whether or not they're measuring right. Yes, you can write the word significantly gained, but I told you, we got to not be talking about like these English words. We got to talk in numbers. And if you look at the numbers, they say the gains in the arm, by the way, 2.6 pounds of lean mass in the arm. Would take you years to develop that kind of a bigger bicep by any reasonable means, but these folks did it in how long was the study? Oh, 1 day. 2.6 pounds of lean muscle tissue added to your arm in 1 day. Yeah, sign me up for that. That sounds fantastic. Too good to be true. The reason why I'm showing you this book, by the way, this is another tremendous book you should all read. Bad Science by Ben Goldacre. And this is a big, long quote. But the gist of it is this part here that I've put in bold and underlined. The idea of making something patentable, copyrightable, is very, very prevalent in the world of nutrition. For example, if I could tell you this advice, all right, all you got to do, folks, if you really want to get healthy, like exercise every day, go for a walk every day, and drink a lot of water. Like I can't sell that advice, right? If you are selling your services and that's what you tell someone, they're going to say, "Who's this idiot? I know that. Get out of here." However, if you say to them, "Look, I invented Morph, and it's this and this and this in these precise quantities, and I developed it, and it's fantastic, and you should buy it from me." He said, "Well, this guy knows what he's talking about. He's the developer of Morph." All I'm saying is watch out for this type of dubious marketing practices. And this whole book is about this kind of stuff. You could check it out. All right, we got to fly through here, folks. I talk too much sometimes, as you might have picked up on my video lectures. More examples of hydration nonsense. Here is this is Angelina Jolie, and she's marketing. It's not Angelina. Who is that? I know who that is. Of course, I know Friends. God's sake. Anyway, Jennifer Aniston is obviously a very, very beautiful Homo sapien, and she's selling this water, which is smart style, smart hydration, smart water. It's just water. Tap water does the exact same thing as Jennifer Aniston's doing. But man, put Jennifer Aniston's face on this, and you could make $1 million. Examples from the world of sports. This is from the NFL, this quarterback talking about the idea of getting IVs. Now, again, I could talk a lot about this too, actually. The more extreme the intervention seems, which we're going to talk about next time we're together, this thing called the placebo effect, right? The more extreme the intervention appears, the better chance it's going to elicit a placebo effect. So if I'm making $10 million a year and I can afford to get an IV hooked up to my body and have stuff injected directly into my body, that seems like a very elaborate thing to do, and it might make you think you feel better or play better. But again, there's no evidence to suggest this is anywhere necessary. And especially like this company calls themselves IV for life. Like just everyday life, you need to get an IV? I don't think so. Once again, you can go to the tap, as I'm going to do in the break, and fill this up with water, and it would do the exact same thing. Here's something I was sent, again, not because I'm a dietitian or anything, just it was sent to me through email. Again, someone's selling me all these things. My favorite one that I could have potentially bought, I didn't buy it though. Look at this. I could have got a tear pad telling me 10 ways to drink water for only $12. So it's like $1 per way, 10 ways to drink water. I thought there was one way. Open your mouth, down the hatch. Apparently there's 10. I could have bought it. I did not. What nonsense. One more. It's just, I took this off MSN this time last year because I thought this was interesting. Is it bad to drink water that's been sitting out overnight? Apparently this is a burning question for the world. Has anyone ever thought about this? Is it bad to drink water? And this guy says, or whoever wrote the article, since your body gets dehydrated overnight, not uncommon to wake up thirsty, I agree, but whether or not you should sip from the glass that you left on your nightstand is up for debate, not by anybody sensible. What do you think happened to your water overnight? I don't have any earthly idea. Did a chemical reaction take place in this glass that made it? I think the author said like a bug could have came by and put his droppings in. I guess that's possible, but folks, your ancestors for thousands of years, if you saw what the stuff they were drinking, my goodness, you think it would make a billy goat puke, but your predecessors drank all kinds of stuff. What nonsense. Okay, let's fly along here. Those are my examples of fluid nonsense. So let's get to the answer all the good questions. This course just tells me tell me what to eat. That's the thesis, the whole point of being in this course. Tell me what to eat. Or in this case, tell me what to drink. So how much should I drink? Got a few things to say about this. Okay, point number 1. As I mentioned off the top, you really got to get this one right. Don't screw this up. There's no other nutrient that has such drastic consequences if you get this wrong. So really, more than anything, you're talking about like really tailoring this recommendation in an individualized kind of a way. Let's just go with this first. So we do have this thing called the DRI, and there is a DRI for fluid, shall I say. I'll call it fluid from now on. And they're different for men and women. And let's do a survey, shall we? Let's do a survey for the males in the room. Your DRI for fluid is 3.7 liters per day. Who's drinking 3.7 liters of fluid per day? Who thinks you're doing that? We got one dude thinks he's drinking 3.7 liters of water or fluid per day. I don't think I'm doing that. I don't know if I'm doing that. Seems kind of high. Seems rather high, you might say. But anyway, hang in there for 1 second. Okay, if you're a female, you have a different recommendation, slightly lower, 2.7 liters for females. So ladies, who thinks you're doing 2.7 liters of fluid per day? Show of hands. Show of hands. More of you think, but still some of you don't think you're doing that. Okay, so those are the DRIs. We'll put those in the bank as being the gold standard recommendation for how much fluid you should accumulate per day. But there's 3 caveats to this that we got to consider. Here are the caveats. There we go. caveat number one, you don't actually have to drink all that. So that's good news for people like me who aren't drinking probably 3.7 liters of fluid per day. 20% of your requirement can actually come from food. And depending what kind of food you're choosing to eat. So think about this, wrap your brain around this. For example, if you think of an apple, like it looks pretty solid, right? It's like 85% water, 85%. I told you, you are like 60% water. An apple is like 85% water. So, and again, if you're just doing something like eating a lot of fruits and vegetables, what a concept that might be. If you have a diet high in those things, you're probably getting a lot of fluid indirectly. Other things, like I told you, so roast beef is the same idea. Your muscle versus a cow's muscle is pretty much the same thing. So that's like 50% water. Nuts. Did I mention nuts? Could I convey my enthusiasm for nuts through the YouTube channel? Did I successfully do that? You would have been much more impressed if I could have done it live. I'm a big fan of nuts. They're not here. They're in my lunchbox though. Not a good source of fluid. Not a good source of fluid. Many, many wonderful reasons to eat nuts. You should all be doing it. Should have its own food group. Did I say that in week number 3? Should have its own food group, did I say that? The nuts and seed food group? Should be. Anyway, not because of fluid. All right, so caveat number 1 was that some of your fluid can come from food. What about caveat number 2? Oh, we got to investigate. We got to unpack this. What about this statement? All fluids count toward this requirement. Is that true? Is that true? Well, okay, well, let's start here. If I told you that an apple, for goodness sake, and that seems pretty solid. If I told you an apple is 85% fluid, then like how much fluid is your glass of milk? Like, what are we talking here? Like 95% water is milk? I don't know, something like that. So anyway, I would say that milk would count towards your fluid requirement. We'll go through some of these examples. You can tell me if you disagree. Because some of you might be, I don't know, this thing we're looking at here, folks, is very controversial, right? This is the most controversial food in the world, I think, milk. We are going to talk about milk a bit later in our course, but for now, we're only talking about fluid. I'll leave milk aside for 1 second. I'll just ask you this. I'll put it to you this way. If you came across Pablo Valencia in the Yuma Desert, no, forget about him. Let's say you put yourself in his shoes. You are stranded in the Yuma Desert and you've been out there for days and days crawling around in the sand and the heat, and someone finds you and they say, oh, I just got a glass of milk. Do you drink it? Of course you drink it. My goodness. Like I said, 95% water probably. So milk counts. What about that though? I know you're all nutrition students and you're all told, oh, you don't drink your fruit. You got to eat fruit. Does juice count? Juice, everyone hates juice. What about though? What if you are in the Yuma Desert and someone finds you and says, I got this nice glass of cold apple juice. Do you say, too much sugar? No, thank you. Absolutely, that would hydrate you. Of course, that would hydrate you. So juice counts. Oh, what about that though? Oh my God, that's public enemy number 1. Would you not agree? You know what's my answer to the question? In week 3, I told you my least favorite food, but I think if you could eliminate one food, I'll expand on my answer there. If you could eliminate one food, abolish one food off the face of the earth for the betterment of humanity's health, I think you'd have to choose Coca-Cola. Based on its global reach, the number of people that are drinking this, I almost swore there, pardon me, this stuff. But, oh man, just think about if you were stranded in the Yuma Desert and someone said, look, I got this Coca-Cola and maybe it was in a bottle. Because that's have you drank that Coke in a bottle? It's way more delicious than in a can. I love it. I come home from my jogs some days in the summer, and that's what I have. Why do I do it? Because it's freaking delicious. It's something about it. It's not the best choice, but because of all the sugar. But in terms of a hydrating effect, would Coca-Cola count? What percentage of Coca-Cola is water, folks? I don't know, 99 maybe? So of course you could drink it. Oh, this is a good one too. We're going to talk about coffee 2 weeks from now. But this is good because there's lots of myths about this too. Who's ever heard the phrase coffee is dehydrating? You've heard that, right? That's a thing. Is that true? Is that true though? Is it true? We'll talk about this in week 6. It's a mild diuretic. You're right. When do I talk about this? Should I do it now or next week? No, I'll save it. I'll tell you this story first. Here's another personal story, talking about how all fluids count. Hang on now. So if we're thinking about what percentage of water all these fluids are, your cup of coffee or your cup of tea, what percentage of that is water? Once again, the answer is like 99%. If caffeine is a diuretic, how powerful of a diuretic is it, I would ask you. Anyway, here's my story. This is a tip for you of dealing with people in the world if you're ever counseling people. I was talking to this was a former Olympian in the sport of field hockey. And I saw someone walking in today with a backpack that had field hockey written on it, by the way. So I'm not making fun of field hockey players. This happened to be field hockey. Anyway, so she was talking to me about hydration and just thinking about coffee and tea, maybe perhaps helping towards hydration. And she knew everything because she was in the Olympics and she wasn't really receptive to what I was saying. So I was trying to convince her that actually, no, tea and coffee do help you towards meeting your hydration status. And she said, no, they don't. No, they don't. She blatantly disagrees with me. Here's my strategy for dealing with that, by the way. You could use this too. So I say to her, so are you telling me that or are you asking me that? That's how I respond to these. Are you telling me or are you asking me? She said, I'm telling you. It's okay then. You know, I'm not going to argue with you if you're convinced of that. Now, the evidence would suggest otherwise. This would count towards your hydration status. It's 99% water. Yes, caffeine's a mild diuretic, but we'll talk about this more in a couple of weeks. Folks, the end of the story would be, absolutely, if you were Pablo Valencia in the Yuma Desert and someone said, I got a cup of coffee here, man, I would drink the coffee. I would drink the coffee or the tea. Oh, speaking of coffee, this is a study about, there's a study. Look at this. You don't buy what I'm saying. There's a study about the evidence of dehydration with moderate daily coffee intake. So they got all these good methodologies in place, 50 coffee drinkers, counterbalance crossover design. They give them coffee for the day. They use a wide variety of techniques to assess hydration, and they find that coffee, when consumed in moderation, provides similar hydrating qualities to water. Science showing us this. Then, of course, you read the fine print that the study was funded by the Institute for Scientific Information on Coffee. So again, one of these organizations, again, that exists to promote how good their own product is. I told you, nutrition is a wickedly difficult field. But that being said, I think the most of the evidence, the preponderance of evidence would say that coffee and tea, although having caffeine, is fine for hydrating. We got one more to talk about here, folks. One more to talk about. Can this computer freeze? Is that possible? What's going on here? Whoops. What happened there? Oh, there we go. Yeah. All right, we're back on track. Oh, and what a good one. What a good one. This is where I ask the question of you all. Show of hands. Don't be afraid, folks. It's okay. We're all friends in NFS 302. Show of hands. There's no judgment in this room, for goodness sake. Who drinks alcohol? Who drinks alcohol? I drink alcohol sometimes. Glass of wine. I enjoy it. Some of you don't drink alcohol. That's okay. No judgment here. What about, though? What about if you were stranded in the Yuma Desert and you're crawling around and someone comes up to you and says, you've been out here for 5 days. All I have is this ice cold beer. Do you drink the beer? Do you drink the beer? Some people are like, yeah, I wish I had one now, some of you are saying. Do you drink the beer? This gets a little bit trickier. I think I would still drink the beer. I think I would still drink it because, again, what percentage would you say of that is water? 99% maybe. but there's things in there that might screw you up a bit. Was there a question or a comment? Yeah, yeah. Oh yeah, I would. Yeah, and the more concentrated, the riskier it would be. So, so if you have a beer, which is like what 5 or 6% alcohol, and then the rest is water mostly. I think I'd drink that. Or someone said, all I got is a shot of whiskey, which is, that might not be so good for your system. I'd be more hesitant. I'd say, do you have a Coke or something there? I don't, but anyway, for a variety of reasons, if you were dying of thirst, you might consider drinking a beer. I'm now going to go off on about a 10-minute spiel about some of the perils you might encounter by drinking too much of this substance that we call alcohol. Although it could theoretically count towards your fluid requirement for the day, I would not, for a whole variety of reasons, want to get too much of that from alcohol. Here's it. I won't go through all this. We see these kind of studies or these marketing campaigns that like advertise light beer to athletes. They're all nonsense. Although, again, you can get some studies to seemingly back them up. I think the whole concept is absurd. Anyway, it won't be on the midterm probably. Speaking of alcohol, here we go. Here's my take on alcohol. Ready for this? I'll explain it to you this way to start. I don't know if you're aware of this. Think of it this way. If alcohol was invented tomorrow, okay? Hypothetically, folks, let's think about this. No such thing exists as alcoholic beverages. Impossible to do. Human beings have been brewing alcohol for literally thousands of years. It's that old. So it's entrenched in culture and society. But if, hypothetically, there was no such thing as alcohol, and someone tomorrow invented it and said, hey, look what I just invented. It's called beer. You know what they would say? They'd say, you can't sell that. It would never be allowed. It would never be allowed to be sold. Like for humans to drink? That's what you're thinking to do with that? No. It would not be allowed to be sold. The main reason being that ethanol, which is the alcohol that exists that we drink, is a class 1 carcinogen. Class 1 carcinogen, a known cancer-causing agent, is the alcohol that we drink, ethanol. They'd say you're selling ethanol to people to drink. Forget it, they would say. We're not going to let you do that. Now, people who know about chemistry would point out, hang on now, your liver is very, very good at metabolizing this stuff, and the ethanol might go into your body, but your liver can metabolize it, and that's true, but the problem is that what it metabolizes into is also a class 1 carcinogen. So the ethanol gets transformed into acetaldehyde, also a class 1 carcinogen. So whatever way you slice this, I'm sorry to say, folks, it's a class 1 carcinogen is the alcohol that we drink some people, daily. It's a habit for them, and it's well documented, I think, to be a cancer-causing agent. Here's just a quick snapshot. This is from the American Society of Clinical Oncology. Like the experts in this stuff, they're all unanimous in their advice that if you're interested in avoiding cancer, like we think alcohol is a cancer-causing agent. In different, it might be different effects on different types of cancer, but in general, this is pretty bad stuff as it relates to cancer, at least. Some of you might be aware of this. We're in the middle of dry February. Who's aware of that? Another initiative by the Cancer Society groups. This one's from Canada, the Canadian Cancer Society. And again, just to emphasize, if your issue is cancer avoidance, I think this is pretty well documented, pretty well established that alcoholic beverages are pretty bad news, I think. Okay, here's another great question. How much alcohol is okay? And I don't know how to answer this. I don't know if there is an answer. For our purposes, the answer will be what you see on this slide here. But this is somewhat my own interpretation of how much alcohol is okay. There's different recommendations from different organizations. I think the quote there at the bottom might be my best message. The associations between alcohol drinking and cancer risk have been observed consistently, regardless of the specific type of alcohol beverage. And people try to debate, well, if I'm only having a shot of whiskey at the end of the day, or whatever is your preference. Is that it's all alcohol, and it all seems to be fairly robustly linked to risk of cancer. You'll note, by the way, although there's different recommendations for how much alcohol is too much, I think you'll be not shocked to learn there is no recommendation for minimum alcohol intake per day, right? It's not a health thing. You're drinking it for other reasons. You like it. You think it enhances your quality of life or time on planet Earth. But from a health point of view, what's the healthiest amount of alcohol to consume? 0 is the answer. In fact, I'd say, at the risk of sounding preachy, never mind Coca-Cola. I didn't include alcoholic beverages in my little hypothetical thought exercise back there when I was talking about what to eliminate from planet Earth to do the most good for the most health for the most number of people. That's only because I don't consider alcohol to be a food. It's your body treats it much more like a drug than a food. If you're going to eliminate one thing that is consumed by human beings to better the health of human beings on planet Earth, look, there's no question about this, that you would eliminate alcohol. To try to tally up the number of catastrophic things that have befallen people due to alcohol, never mind the long-term risk of getting cancer. I mean, you all know this, like the alcoholism itself, relationships, accidents, all these kind of things are negatively impacted by alcohol. This is an organization that tries to tally up as best they can the human cost of alcohol on planet Earth. And I think of all the things that we consume regularly, this by far does the most damage to human beings than anything else we consume. Now, there's one more thing I got to talk about, because people always ask this. They say, wait a second, I've heard some things, Dennis, you're saying some very bad things about alcohol, painting alcohol in a very, very negative light. I've heard some good things, though. I've heard some good things about alcohol. And I say, have you, though? Be more specific. And they say, well, yeah, I guess you're right. What I've heard about is wine. Here's what I'd say about that. First of all, I agree. You could seek out and find some studies that link wine intake with positive health outcomes. Specifically, though, we're not talking about cancer. We're talking about, it's usually this one. It's usually cardiovascular disease, right? You've all heard this. Have a glass of wine in the evening, and it's beneficial towards cardiovascular disease. Here's my slant on this. Well, I'll ask you first, all you alcohol connoisseurs out there, what is used to make this? The process of fermenting alcohol, thousands of years old. You get some kind of carbohydrate, right? You ferment it, and it turns into alcohol through the miracle of organic chemistry. What do you ferment to make this? You use grapes. What do you use to make beer? Or hops, And all these kind of alcohols have different things they are made out of, they're fermented out of. If I was to pick one food as the healthiest possible food, you might say, well, like fruits and vegetables are the healthiest possible food. Is it a coincidence that the one alcoholic beverages that is linked to health outcome is the one that comes from these things that we know are super, super healthy? And my question is this, okay, to all the people that advocate that a glass of wine is so beneficial to your health, here's what I would ask you. I'd say, okay, are you telling me then that it is the healthier thing to do is go home every evening and have a glass of wine versus eating a serving of grapes? Is that what you're saying? That seems somewhat bizarre to me, to think that's healthier. And then they might say, yeah, but the benefit comes not just from the food chemistry going on here. It's the calming effect, and I feel better. I get more mellow, and the wine does this for me. To that, I would say, is there not easier ways to chill out than consuming this carcinogen? How about meditate? Do yoga? Would that not do the trick? Is that a healthier thing? So whatever way you slice it, I think that the health implications associated with alcohol are overblown, because really it's only the one that what I can see is wine. I don't think anybody in their right mind thinks it's healthy to drink a beer every day. I've never heard that before. It seems very, very odd. Or have a shot of whiskey every day. That seems very odd to think that's healthy. You do hear it with wine sometimes. And I think, again, like I said, it's the comparison of where it comes from. Fruits we know are fantastic. So eat your grapes and do some yoga. And that might be better for your health than drinking a glass of wine. Okay, that was my rant about alcohol. Now, show of hands again. Of the people who admitted to drinking alcohol, we'll do a rebound survey. Who is not going to drink alcohol anymore after hearing my 10-minute speech there? None. I convinced nobody. I turned nobody off. That's okay. That's not why we're here, folks. I told you, there's no judgment here in NFS 302. Do whatever makes you happy. All right, we're going to go through for another maybe 10 minutes, and I know exactly where we're going to end. So hang in with me, folks. We got about 10 minutes left. Then we'll take a quick break. So we are now back. I had a tangent, as I warned you about, talking about alcohol. Now we're going to talk about the third caveat that plays a role in determining how much fluid you should intake every day. And this is, now we're talking, folks, now we're talking about our stuff. We're talking about exercise. Because the third caveat that influences your fluid recommendation is how much activity that you get. And what is normal activity? I have no earthly idea. If you're, well, I guess normal is nothing for most people. We're too sedentary in this society. But if I'm a high-level athlete who's training and sweating, my goodness, it's going to greatly change my fluid requirement, right? And speaking of this topic, speaking of how much activity you get, how much exercise you do, we have finally come to water's most important function as it relates to what we are interested in here in this course. And that is physical human performance. The most important function of water as it relates to that is your ability to release and absorb heat. Okay? By far the most important, most relevant thing from an exercise point of view when you're talking about fluid. Two factoids here from the world of physics that really encapsulate why this is so. All right. Number one, for every 1,000 calories that you expend during activity, only about 200 are used for movement. The rest is lost as heat. Now think about that for a second. Again, evolution has geared you to be a very, very cool machine. You can do a lot of good stuff. You're far from perfect. And it's an error, by the way, if you think evolution has created things that are perfect. This is incredibly inefficient, I would suggest. It was good enough to get us by, but that's all evolution does, is tries to get your genes into the next generation. It doesn't make perfect machines. But to put it this way, if you were an engineer and your house lost 80% of the heat that it generated, like you'd say, what the hell are you doing with this house? You got to fix it. You got to make it better. Very, very inefficient. So what I'm saying is when you start exercising and your muscles start contracting, you're running, you're sprinting, you're lifting weights, you're whatever you're doing, that is generating an enormous quantity of heat. And you got to get rid of that heat somehow. You got to dissipate the heat, okay? Or else disaster looms quickly. How do you get rid of the heat? How about this? Water conducts heat 26 times faster than air. So if there was some way whereby your organism could harness this little nugget of physics that water dissipates heat, or conducts heat, 26 times faster than the air, my goodness, what an advantage. What an advantage you'd have if you could figure out some way to do that. And we have figured out some way to do that. Oh, just to set the stage here again, talking about temperature. This is the point in the course where I used to always ask, I'd ask you, is anybody sick? And that's not at all appropriate anymore to ask, but I'd ask, so who, anybody, think about how the world has changed, eh? I'd ask, anyone have a cold? Anyone not feeling, yeah, I'm kind of sick. Oh my God, can you imagine someone raise their hand? Yeah, I'm not feeling too well today, but here I am. You'd be the pariah of the university. My God. But anyway, what I would do is I would ask people, who's sick? Anyone sick? And a few raise their hand, yeah, I'm not feeling so well. Crazy, eh? And I would say, of all of us in this room, if we could take a temperature check, we used to also do this kind of fun stuff in this class too, by the way. I used to do a blood sample. I'd take my blood sugar. You're missing out. We can't interact like that anymore. I would take a blood sugar of me, and I would drink a Gatorade. Okay? Follow along here. Blood sugar in the morning, fasting blood sugar. We get a reading. Then I drink a Gatorade for the whole lecture. And I'd come back after it was done and someone would take my blood sugar again. I'd get a volunteer to come down. They'd stab me. It was great fun. And we'd see how the Gatorade impacted my blood sugar. Oh, that was fun. There was thoughts in the works prior to 2020. We'd do urinalysis in this class. Wouldn't that have been so much fun? You could I'd bring in the bottles. You could go pee in the bottle, bring it back. We'd test the urine-specific gravity. Wouldn't that have been fun, folks? Analyzing our urine together, bleeding together. All this stuff is just out the window. Anyway, that was another tangent. I apologize. Yes, what I was getting at is this. Human temperature, tightly regulated. If you were to get a temperature for all of us in this room today, we'd all be like 37.2, 37.1, 37, 37.3. Very, very narrow would be our temperature. You hear sometimes, just to hear stories about like nurses. Put it this way, if you know a nurse, anyone know a nurse, go home and ask a nurse, hey, have you ever taken a 40-degree temperature? And they'll say, no, that doesn't, no. Whose job it is to do this for sick people, your temperature would hardly ever get to 40, okay? 37 within a very narrow range is normal. 40 is never happens really. 44, you're probably dead. You can't, human metabolism no longer functioning, you're probably dead if it's 44. So we're talking like a 7-degree difference from totally normal to dead. If it was 20 degrees outside or 27 degrees outside, what would that be? Well, no. Internally, that's the difference in normal and dead. So the moral of the story is, this is serious stuff. If your body temperature creeps up too high, and it's going to happen fairly quickly, then there's catastrophic outcomes that could befall you. We need some way. How on earth could we try to regulate this thing, this body temperature? Maybe there's a way. I'm getting to it. A couple slides, though, about this topic, about when it does get too high and catastrophe strikes. There's a thing called exertional heat stroke. One of the leading causes of sudden death in athletes. Anyone know what is the leading cause of death? Just for fun. Anyone know? Young athletes drop dead sometimes. What's the reason, main reason why? Anyone? No, not overexertion. No. Heart attack, yeah, congenital heart issues. Like they don't know about it and they just drop. That's the leading cause of sudden death in athletes. However, there is this thing that happens sometimes called exertional heat stroke. Different than, by the way, got to clarify here, this thing that we also call heat stroke when we mean classical heat stroke. Okay, you got to have the word exertional in front of it when you're talking about athletes. Heat stroke itself is usually what happens like to elderly in nursing homes. And again, that's lots of them die every year because of this reason. But it's different than athletes exerting themselves, creating an internal temperature that's too high because of their physical exertion. That's exertional heat stroke. Oh, and by the way, this stuff was from the Corey Stringer Institute. I emailed them. They're very nice to get back to me. Corey Stringer was an NFL football player. NFL fans here? Anyone? No one? Super Bowl this weekend. Nobody? That's okay. Anyway, Corey Stringer was a NFL player who collapsed and died from exertional heat stroke. Lots of good resources there if you want to check them out. The best one of all was this one that I found. I'm pressing a button that causes this to freeze. You gotta stop pressing that button, obviously. There we go. Okay, wrap your brain around this. Yes? Yeah. There is absolutely something called heat acclimatization. That is absolutely a thing. And you train for it. Like if you're going to compete in a hot environment, athletes will deliberately build up their tolerance to working in the heat. That is absolutely a thing. Now, I don't talk about it too much in this course, but it is absolutely a legitimate phenomenon. Build up your tolerance to heat. And you can do it in the cold too, which is so much interesting stuff. Because my son never wears pants. He's 11 and he goes to school every freaking day with shorts because he thinks it's cool. But I think he is building up a tolerance. If you're interested, look up Wim Hof, the Iceman. You ever hear? Who's heard of him? You ever heard of this guy? just like runs marathons in his underwear, and he puts himself in ice, and he's built up this incredible. So it works both ways. Anyway, can't get too off track. This is an important slide, very important slide. Okay, you're ready to be blown away. Ready to be blown away here. And your question kind of tied into this, the idea of what are some of the factors that lead into exertional heat stroke? What are the contributors? Here's a graph. Follow along here. The black bars represent instances of exertional heat stroke that ultimately led to a fatality. The athlete dies, or the black bars. The gray bars are instances of heat stroke that have been recorded that are not fatal, but still yet an instance of the person was in pretty bad danger. They had an exertional heat stroke but didn't die. Anyway, look at the black bars. What is the leading contributor, or not the leading contributor, the most prevalent factor in cases of exertional heat stroke? What are they? These two here. Look at them. Absence of triage. In other words, the insufficient medical treatment. The other factor was physical effort greater than fitness level. So that's something else you can control at least. But those two were present in 100% of the cases of fatal exertional heat stroke. So as compiled by the Corey Stringer Institute, the experts on this topic. Where does dehydration rank on this? Would it freak you out if I told you? Like it's the last one? Yep. So here's what I would say. Good question. I would lump that would be kind of a before and after scenario, okay? So proper hydration available like during the event. What I'm talking about, as we'll talk about when we talk about the actual negative consequences of dehydration, it's showing up at the event in a state of dehydration. That would be a bad thing. But the idea of these athletes being dehydrated and then dying of exertional heat stroke, it was present in the least number, or it was the bottom of the list. The bottom of the list. That's a bit of a teaser, by the way, some foreshadowing coming up here. Start off my screen. Oh, for God's sake. Anyway, I'll plow through. Is that in your way up there? No signal. I'll fix this in the break. Bear with me for a second. All right. Okay. So we're talking about dissipating heat. You have 4 ways you can do that. We're almost done, folks. Hang in. There's 4 ways a human being can dissipate heat. And again, we're talking about some physics here. Number 1, conduction, okay, which is heat being transferred directly from one object to another, a cool cloth on the forehead. When you were a kid, you all remember this, and your mother, and you were sick, your mother would put a cold cloth on your forehead. Remember that, folks? Whose mother did that for them? Raise your hand. Don't raise your hand. It's okay. It's okay. That is a way you can dissipate heat. The cool cloth takes the heat out of your body. It's conduction. Heat always travels down a gradient. You're never putting cold into something. It doesn't work that way. The colder item or surface area will suck the heat out of the hot one. So that would be your body. So that's absolutely a way. Not too relevant, I don't think, to sports performance. We are getting there. Hang in there. This one's more relevant. This one's more relevant to sports performance. It's called convection. So the air blowing past your skin can grab heat and whisk it away. That's another way you can get rid of this heat you're building up when you're exercising. So too is this one, radiation. You do have the ability to shoot your body heat out into the atmosphere. However, 2 things. Remember I told you, that's not the most efficient way. Water conducts heat 26 times faster than the air. So if you're just shooting heat out from your body into the air, it's possible, not as efficient. And point number 2, what I just said about heat moving down a gradient, you totally lose the ability to radiate heat when the outer environment is hotter than you. And what did I say was your temperature again? Human temperature would be? Again, every single one of us here is probably 37 degrees. If the environment is hotter than 37, which is not common probably, but also not totally impossible. Best example, the Kona Hawaii Ironman triathlon is regularly run in heats that are above 37 degrees. And even in Toronto, you could probably exercise, go for a jog, and it's hotter than 37. If that's the case, your ability to radiate heat is obliterated. So those three are ways physically you can dissipate heat, but they all pale in comparison, folks, to the most important one for nutrition, which is our ability to sweat, aka evaporation. That would be the most relevant one for sports nutrition. This slide will change. Oh, for God's sake. All right, folks, how about this? We take our break here. I got a big reveal coming up here now, so it's not a bad place to take a quick break. 10-minute break, and I'll try to get this rectified here after the break. But it's a good, I got some good stuff to say in 10 minutes time. Hi, how are you? Okay, we'll fix it. Oh, yeah, it's certainly present. Absolutely. There's a whole bunch of different fiber types. You all have them in differing proportions. I skipped over it just basically because, I don't know, it's kind of beyond the scope of what we're going to talk about in nutrition. Say, not as fast and slow. Knowledge and growth. It would be decreased on a spectrum. Yeah, like the ones that are really geared towards used for like a super powerful sprinting activity. Predominantly, you would use the intermediate. And you could use the slow too. But it's like a scale of 100 degrees, like 3%. The intermediate one will be higher than that. But predominantly, your body is good at it, especially for training. It's good at identifying, well, this is what's better than used to, because we're trying to practice and we're trying to get good at this, and your body does that. It's a metabolic. So we're going to fire the fiber that needs that. For this course, just like I said, look, the summary would be lots of fiber type. You know, fast and slow, okay, conceptual. 1% in that case was the 1% of the Jason max would be. So we do it for 15 minutes. No, sorry, 1500. I don't know if that's 1% of your view. It's 14 minutes. When I say very high, let's get some. It will be something like, if we say a marathon, a marathon is like 80, 85, I think. Then it would be a 5K race, which is longer than a swim, is like I think 90% of what you're Because when you're talking over 90, so I would guess, because it's 14 minutes, and it's all out, just going to kind of go hard as you can. There would be a very 5% of that race is competing at the athlete. Something near the athlete's field max. The longer it goes, the lower. So, for example, the other example I gave was the race walk. Doing like for 3.5 hours, almost 6, 7%. Where I want to be, you can't keep that high level work at your VO2 max for that matter. The longer it goes, highly trained athlete, but there's human limits. You can't forever. Put it this way: no race walk that goes for 3.5 hours, 90% of VO2 max. No human's ever done it, but I never did. Almost. Moving next. These doing for when they're doing their max effort, and if they're against all these other people who are also high level out, only like 95% means if you put me in a pool with a bunch of random idiots, and they all go at the same rate, okay? All the other random people, I'm like 95%. Oh, sorry, I can't. It's killing it. They're bench. It's relative to them. It's 95%. So your example is 95%. The best effort is 95%. They could also look pretty good, but very not elite.
Here's a quick question for this one. So are these just supposed to be specific to exertional heat stroke?
Mhm.
Can like dehydration, overweight still be like one of the?
Oh, for sure, yeah.
Okay.
There would be some overlap, yeah. So, yeah, for example, a person's overweight and a nursing for
Yeah.
sure, higher risk. I'm gonna talk more about that in a second.
Okay. And also regarding the wine and grape like controversy. So obviously there's studies out there about wine like being a little bit of a benefit for CBD. So what if you did a study with like 2 groups and like one did the wine, one did a servings of grapes a day?
You should
Like
do
would
this.
they
You should do.
like so what I don't know, wouldn't the results be
how
non-significant?
could wine win? I don't know how wine would win. Maybe it would, but we need to see what would win.
Oh.
To me, just intuitively,
Yeah, no, it makes
if
sense.
everything else was the same, it's possible to get exactly the same.
So are there no studies on that? Like
I don't know. You should do one.
How?
I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah, there are summer funding for like happening right now.
I guess like clinical trials. Thank
Very
you.
interesting. Let's do one more. Oh, it's back. Who knows about fixing computers? Who wants to come down and fix my screen? Anybody? Who's good at this? That's supposed to be black. See this on my screen? I think it's just freezing up. Touch this, see what happens. Maybe turns it off. I'm supposed to see there what you see. Plug things. Yeah, this. Yeah. I could plow through, but it's not as easy. Oh, wow, look what happened. Oh, for the love of God. I'll just plow through like this.
Do you have a lot of text on the bottom?
What if we minimize them? It's better though. Well, not great. Not perfect.
Can I just ask one more?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so, like George.
Oh yeah.
So it's about the test on Wednesday. So I think
Your interview was 9 to.
well, it's just, it'll fall somewhere in that range. I hope it'll answer, but I'm not sure.
I was thinking of 9 to 5. That's what I was thinking.
It takes 2 hours.
Maybe we'll do like 12 hours.
Okay.
Maybe we'll do 12 hours then.
Yeah, that was.
Why is your interview so long?
I don't know.
I will do it like 12 hours. 9 to 9.
That'll be my.
But you gotta start at 7.
Yeah.
They're fixing this. Like what? There's good ones out there.
It was not good. It's just watching kind of just random tribals.
Oh.
Get their hands on more dangerous stuff, I think. So it, I guess the majority of is there a better I don't know about let's say majority. There's a way to minimize yeah, I don't make
Good question. I don't know what I wouldn't be able to cite. I'm sure it's out there. My guess would be they're going on a spectrum. The bigger risk would be for young. Yeah. You do more, you can screw yourself up worse the younger you are. The older you get, the less risky it gets, the younger. I don't know if I can date that. But put it this way, like there's a school of thought that like men who are 50, 60, you should be taking just those because you're losing it. It does great things. There's a definite school of thought that you should take it. So for them, and then that's not a slam dunk. I'm saying it's a school of thought. So, but to go from there is like, well, probably if you took steroid, like, maybe it's good for you. Never mind bad. But for someone to be like not fully developed, and you're screwing around with that stuff, I would think it would be. Well, I mean, say 16, 7-year-old kids going to be hockey players, going to be one of the coolest out there. It's terrifying. It was absolutely. Like, look up high school students' steroid use. Yeah, that would be my biggest concern. You fixed it?
We fixed it.
Okay. All right, folks. We are back. We'll go again for about an hour and then take another break. That will be our system here. That'll be our system. Now I'm flying. I don't have the screen in front of me anymore, so yet another challenge for us to overcome. But we've overcome so many challenges in these last 2 years. What is but one more? I can't see my slide. That's okay. All right. So the most fun one, the most interesting one, the most relevant one to people that are interested in exercise, reason why water or fluid, should I say, is so important is this, number 4, your ability to dissipate heat. Oh, don't tell me. Seriously. Try one more. Let's do this. All right, I'll try it this way. All right, folks. If I was to tell you, I find this stuff very, very interesting. If I was to tell you that the very reason why Homo sapiens have become the dominant species on planet Earth is because of this very ability that you and I and our fellow human beings have, dissipating heat, what would you say? Wouldn't you say that is amazing? How could that be? How could that characteristic have enabled us to rise to the dominant species on planet Earth? Your ability to dissipate heat. Well, let's take a look at this picture for a second to see if this is true. We'll just do a visual inspection to see what might be some of the advantages that we have, this thing over here, over our fellow mammals when it comes to dissipating heat. So there's a few that come to mind, obviously. What would be an advantage that this guy has over this thing in terms of dissipating heat, sending heat out into the universe? What would be an advantage for this one over this one? This one's much hairier. Would you all agree? So we are, make no mistake, we're all apes, relatively hairless apes. When a lot of these other mammals that are similar to us have the disadvantage when it comes to heat dissipation of being very, very hairy. We are much less so. The hair traps in heat. Our skin enables us to shoot heat off as being one advantage. A bigger advantage, which is not obvious by visual inspection, is that human beings have way, way more glands distributed much more evenly over the entire anatomy for producing sweat than do many of our other mammals. So I've asked you this before, not live, but I know many of you have dogs for pets, right? How does your dog, when he gets tired, what does the dog do? He has to use its tongue and mouth. That's because they don't have the sweat glands that Homo sapiens have. We have them all over our body. That's another advantage. An advantage that you might not be able to infer just by looking, but this is a big advantage. How about this? Look at this. The fact that human beings walk upright, as opposed to, our fellow mammals like, cows and dogs and things like that. Even our fellow apes are much more crouched over than we are. And what that does is gives us a better angle of the sun hitting us. There's less body surface area exposed to the sun. If you picture, a big cow or a big hippopotamus, they have an enormous swath of skin that's exposed directly to the sun. Because we're at an angle, okay, this enables us to avoid the direct rays of the sun and the heat that ensues thereby. So all these things are reasons why we wound up being very, very good at dissipating heat, much better than many of our fellow mammals. In fact, you might say we evolved to be endurance animals. And this is a really cool thing. Oh, it's a great book, by the way. This is like top 5 for sure. Look at the title, The Story of the Human Body. The Story of the Human Body. What a fascinating read this was. And here's a story to illustrate, if you're not buying what I'm saying about how come we're so good at dissipating heat and thereby being really, really good at endurance type activities, why don't you check this out? Look at these 2 facts and wrap your brain around this. How is this even possible? All right, your ancestors and mine were hunting big game animals like 2 million years ago. Direct ancestors to us hunting these big beastly animals that were bigger than us, stronger than us, faster than us 2 million years ago. But human beings only invented projectile weapons like 500,000 years ago. Tell me, how on earth were we doing it? How is it possible? That's 1.5 million years, mind-boggling amount of time. How could we hunt and kill and eat meat like that? What's the answer? The answer is this thing called persistence hunting. Now, follow along here. I'm going to illustrate how this would work. Let's pretend that we are not a university class. Let's pretend we are a tribe of cave people, okay? 2 million years ago. We're out on the plains of Africa, all of us, and this is about, maybe a bit smaller would be our tribe, but give or take, we're all a tribe on the plains of Africa 2 million years ago, and we want to eat today. We want to eat. And we know that big bison over there, he looks tasty. Problem is, He weighs like 4,000 pounds. He's got these enormous horns. He's way faster than us. Bigger, stronger, faster. What are we going to do to get that delicious bison? Here's what we're going to do. We're going to implement this technique called persistence hunting. Okay, few techniques. Here's what we're going to do. First of all, we're going to schedule, listen to this. We're going to be very, very strategic because we were smart even 2 million years ago. We're going to schedule our hunt at the height of the noonday sun. What are most animals doing in the middle of the day? Sleeping. Why is that? They don't want to be out running about. But we're us Homo sapiens, we're not Homo sapiens yet, but we're smart and we have this ability that they don't. So we're going to schedule our hunt right at noon. We're going to pick out the biggest, the juiciest, most the biggest body we can find. We're going to single out that animal. Okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to pick them out at noon, and we're going to run up and scare the thing. We're going to scare them away. Me, a couple other you people. Who wants to join me doing this, by the way? Who's the volunteer? Oh, we're in? Okay. We're going to get them. Don't worry. So we're going to run them to scare the thing. Now, this big bison gallops. I'll use that word deliberately. Or should I say sprints? They sprint away. Are we going to catch them? Are we going to catch them? Not a chance do we have. They are way faster than us. We're going to scare him. He's going to run away. Now, the bison's going to say, oh, thank God I got away from those idiotic hominins. They're a nuisance, man. Look, I ran away from them, thank goodness. Oh, wait a second. They're still following me. They're far away, but they're still coming. They're maybe even tracking me. And so we get up again. We scare him again. He runs away. He sprints again. He sprints. He's, oh, wow, those things are really, they're getting on my nerves, those things. They're really making me sprint those. And we do it again and again and again and again. Okay, repeatedly, shall we say in terms of exercise science, you'd call it intervals, really is what it is. We'd make this big bison do intervals. Folks, we are very, very good, maybe even more specifically than endurance, we are interval animals because of its ability to sweat. The bison I'm saying bison. I should not have said wildebeest is what I meant. Has that totally fooled you all up? I don't think so. Wildebeest does not have our ability to regulate heat. We're forcing the thing to sprint. And if you do this for, give or take 15 kilometers, at this point, the wildebeest is in a complete state of hyperthermia, overheating. And there's actual videos of this that are on YouTube of like modern day tribes that do this. I've debated showing them, but they're rather graphic. By the end, the wildebeest is totally, these things have chased me all day and I can't regulate my heat. To the point where, like, there's not even a throw of the spear. Like, you walk up and you're like you just stick them. Like, the thing can't even move anymore. Or what was really kind of violent, they speculate you wouldn't even need a spear. All you got to do is scare the thing repeatedly, and they speculate maybe like the hunters just grabbed a rock and went smash because the wildebeest is totally incapacitated, can no longer thermoregulate, and is almost dead already. This is how we wound up being the dominant species on planet Earth, so say some people. Our ability to repeatedly sprint, repeatedly do intervals over a great length of time. Other animals might be better than us in terms of speed, in terms of their ability to walk for long periods of time, but it's the repeated sprint that separates us from our fellow animals, which this slide illustrates nicely. Oh, I forgot to add this. Oh, that's okay. This story illustrates my point, because I know some of you are thinking, wait a second. You're telling me that our ancestors could walk better than this wildebeest, but what about Pablo Valencia in the desert? He was on a horse, right? Would he not have been better off on his horse? You can't tell me that he's better off on his own 2 feet than on a horse. Like, so what are you saying here, Dennis? What I'm saying is, if I could emphasize one more time, folks, it's the difference in sprinting versus, to use the phraseology in the world of equestrian. Anybody here a horse rider? Anyone? Equestrian events? It's the difference in what they call a trot and a gallop. Or exercise physiology terms, a sprint. So these horses, or this dog as an example, I found this, by the way, a few years ago. Look at the date, by the way. It was like literally the day before I delivered this lecture. I thought it was so cool. I was going to go in and talk to the class about how, oh, we're way better than these four-legged animals at endurance. And I read this thing on MSN. This dog accidentally runs a marathon and comes 7th. But how could the dog do that? How could the dog do that? A couple things. First of all, you should note, look at the date again, January. Was it hot or cold here? So the temperature is not hot, so that's an advantage for the dog. But most importantly, what I'm getting at is this. The dog never sprinted. He's trotting. He's not galloping. The minute the dog has to sprint, he's on a path to destruction. He can't keep doing that. What humans are really, really good at is sprint, recover, sprint, recover, sprint, recover, sprint, recover. We're going to lose to a horse or a dog, but these are for, shall I say, biomechanical reasons, for goodness sake. They have 4 legs, we have 2. If they trot, they might do really, really well in a marathon. But the minute we tell them to sprint, they can sprint for a while, and they can sprint faster than us for a short distance. But our ability is to sprint and recover, sprint and recover. All right. And it's because of our ability to sweat as to why we're so good at this. Think of all the heat you generate, for goodness sake, by sprinting. The most intense stuff you can do is sprint or gallop. If you can't get rid of this heat, you are going to be not able to sustain that kind of activity. Humans are very, very good at doing it because we have this ability to sweat. Now, there's all kinds of factors that influence sweat rate. I'm not going to talk about them all here. We're going to talk about most of these in the form of some case studies to make it real world and interesting. But this is the list of stuff that influences sweat rate. Oh, I made a note about this one because I thought it was interesting. Tattoos. Where's my tattoo of the bell curve? I didn't get it yet, by the way. I might one day. If I was to do that, then seems to be, according to some studies, that patch of skin that is tattooed is actually less good at thermoregulating. So said this study. Conor McGregor was not in the study, by the way. I just chose him because he's the most tattooed athlete I could think of. Anyway, moral of the story, there's a whole bunch of factors that I showed you that influence sweat rate. And to make it real world and come to life, let's use some examples considering those factors that I just showed you. All right? How about this? You can tell me what you think is the answer here. And we are going to answer these here and now. We'll answer these here and now. Which of these 2 outdoor endurance sports is more dependent upon you, the athlete, being a real good sweater? And both these sports have things in common. So we're talking about running races, endurance running races, versus endurance cycling races. 2 very, very popular things. But I want to suggest one of these, you really got to be able to sweat. One, the other, you might be able to get away with not being such a good sweater. And which is which? What do you think? Let's do a vote. You can raise your hand. Which outdoor endurance sport is sweat rate more relevant to success? Who says running? Hands down. You're all right. Why'd you say that? Why though? What's the reason? Yes? You just said the word. Very astute. Remember point number 2 about ways you can dissipate heat. One is called convection. Tell me this. You're on a bike. You're speeding along at an incredible rate of speed relative to what you can run. All that while, you're creating this wind whisking over you, grabbing heat, taking it away. Never mind the fact, sometimes you might be literally, you could be going down a hill, for goodness sake. So you're creating no heat and just getting it all whisked away. This is not how running works, right? This is not how running works. The only way you can locomote in a running race is by your muscles contracting time and time again, over and over and over, generating enormous quantities of heat. If that's the case, and you want to be a good runner, you better be able to produce this thing called sweat and use that method to dissipate heat, evaporation, aka sweating. So you're absolutely right. That was the answer. How about this? All right, we're going to examine this real life human being here. You're going to tell me what's going on here. What's the deal? Some of you may know her if you're a fan of marathon running. You're looking at, by the way, the greatest female marathon runner of all time. Anyone know her name? This is not among your slides. By the way, I occasionally don't put all the stuff in slides. I do. I know you hate that, but I never leave on anything relevant, I don't think. Okay, anyway, Paula Radcliffe. Look at her story here. Great stories here, folks, in the world of sports, especially these running things. It's like science laboratories being played out before our eyes in a competitive environment. Fascinating stuff. Look at Paula's history, okay? So during her peak, so the early 2000s up to the late 2000s, give or take, she was absolutely the best female marathon runner that there was, maybe the best of all time. And you have these in marathon running, like the big city marathons are what you aim to win. And she shows up to a bunch of them and wins them all. Look at this. London in April 2002, win. Chicago, October 2002, win. London in April 2003, not just wins, sets the record, which I think stands to this day, the fastest time a female has ever run a marathon. Now, she's gearing up for, we all know, the Olympics, the grandest stage of them all, what everybody you trained 4 years to do. And she's had all this success going into Athens in 2004. And what's the result? Couldn't even finish. Couldn't even finish the race. Disappointing. Then she comes back, same year, comes back a few months later in New York, win. London in April, win. Helsinki, Finland, win. New York in November, win. Now, the quad is passed. New Olympic is coming up in Beijing in the summer, and she finishes this time, but she comes 23rd. Comes back again a few months later in New York, wins. What the hell is going on? What can we explain? How can we explain this? This person who's so dominant at all these other races, but can't put it together at the Olympics. What's going on there? Anybody? Few possibilities. You might say, well, maybe you could say, if you're going to be a potential future sports psychologist, you might say, well, she choked under pressure. It's possible. I have it on good authority. Not the case. She's tough as nails mentally. Not an issue of mental toughness or psychology. What's going on here? What are the commonalities? Anyone been in London, England in April? Anyone been in Finland ever? New York in the fall? If it's in a cold environment, Paula was unbelievable. The minute it gets hot, physiologically, folks, I'm trying to impress upon you, physiologically, she is now at a disadvantage because she, although an unbelievable runner, is less good at regulating heat. And why is that? Now, no one knows this, but Paula Radcliffe, the thing about her was, she was literally and figuratively head and shoulders above her competitors in the female marathon. She's very, very tall, bigger than most of the other female marathon runners. If you meet a female marathon runner, they're very, at least an elite level, very specific in terms of size, and it's not big. She was much taller than her competitors. And what I'm saying is that physique, that anatomy is less conducive to thermoregulating than is other types of physiques. There's actually a couple of rules here. And this has been known in biology for centuries, okay? You've got to have the optimal skin surface to muscle mass ratio. And to summarize really quickly, the bigger you get, there's a reason why I told you, everything I do up here is for a reason, by the way. Why did we choose the biggest possible wildebeest? Because that body type is less good at dissipating heat, less good at thermoregulating. Paula, for a variety of other reasons, was a great runner, but she was taller, bigger than her competitors. And if you put her in the wrong environment, namely a hot environment, her ability to thermoregulate goes down the drain. And she has these terrible finishes during hot Summer Olympic competitions. The key one on the slide before this was skin surface to muscle mass ratio. It's a very, very specific niche you got to fit into if you're going to be an elite marathon runner. Last one. Oh, sorry, one more after this. What do you think? Who's watching the Olympics, by the way? Show of hands. should watch the Olympics. Could be some tests, some questions in the midterm pulled from Olympic case studies. I'm thinking of doing that. Anyway, cross-country skiing, you could find on your television screen these days. My question to you is, would this be a high sweat or a low sweat sport? What do you think? I just talked all about temperature. These athletes could be competing in sub-zero temperatures. So does that mean they don't sweat? What's the deal? I would say this is a high sweat sport because, I mean, think about this, for goodness sake. Cross-country skiing, of all things, lower body and upper body, all these muscles contracting and generating heat. My goodness, that's a ton of heat that's being created. And yes, the external environment might be conducive to dissipating it. However, I'd also point out, first of all, number one, you're generating an enormous quantity of heat. So it's got to be dissipated somehow. Never mind the environment being cold, I would suggest that the microenvironment, if you want to sound smart, you could say the microenvironment. Look at these, like these skin-tight suits and the hat, like all the skin is covered, right? So although externally it could be cold, I would say, number one, they're generating tons and tons of heat. And number two, the microenvironment is not cold. So this would be a high sweat sport, would be my guess, I would say, in case that's on the midterm exam somehow. All right, last few case studies we're going to take out of this table. And this is a really rich table here. All right, put an asterisk by this. This could be useful for all kinds of things, not the least of which is your athlete case study paper. Maybe you might rely on this table here. Because this table summarizes how much you are likely to sweat in a bunch of different sports. The authors pooled the data that was available about how much sweat an average exercising human might be expected to generate in each of these sports. Fascinating question. How much can you sweat? The million-dollar question. This table hopes to answer it. So let's pick out a few things, shall we, and talk about them. So here's how it goes. There's all these sports over here, different sports. And this is the sweat rate liters per hour. All right, so if I was to pick out what would be, if you look at this column, just really quickly glance at this column, what sport has the highest sweat rate? What a good example to talk about. Tennis players, anybody? Tennis? Bjorn Borg, the great tennis player, said, tennis is like 1,000 little sprints. So you serve, you do a super high exertion, all high intensity, serving the ball, springing to one side, springing to the other, and it lasts like what? 10 seconds? Stop, do it again. Stop, do it again. Stop, do it again. 1,000 little sprints. What did I say was our great advantage as our species compared to other species? Our ability to do repeated sprint intervals. That's all tennis is. Other factors, by the way, make tennis a really high sweat sport. Usually it's outdoors, right? In the sun, sun's beating down upon you. And it also, although it's a sprint and stop sport, it lasts a really, really long time. Some tennis matches go on hours. So you put all that together, sprinting, stopping, that is the very nature of what we're good at, right? Building up crazy amounts of heat, but getting rid of it so we can do it again. No other animal can do that except for us. And that's what tennis is. So if you look at the table, yeah, tennis winds up being a really, really high sweat sport. And the number, by the way, good to know, in case anybody asks you, how much can you sweat? Like 2.6 liters an hour of sweat coming out of your body is that's pretty high if you can do that. You do hear sometimes crazy amounts of sweat rates. It's possible. We'll get to that in a different lecture when we talk about weight cutting for like weight category sports. But in general, if you can sweat 2.5 liters in an hour, if you can do that, you're doing pretty good. What is the other sport that's really high in terms of sweat rate? Squash, the same kind of deal as tennis, right? Sprinting, stopping. The other one I want to direct your attention to, American football is up here somewhere too. What would be some of the criteria of football players leading to high sweat rates? If you go back to that slide with all the points, all the factors influencing sweat rate, football checks a lot of columns there that might make you predict, if you do that, yeah, you're going to sweat a lot. What might some of them be? Tell you what, I'll go back to what I'm saying time and time again. One of the reasons is, in general, those kind of athletes have a very, very poor body type for thermoregulating. They're big, great big guys who play American football. That body type is not conducive to thermoregulating. The skin surface to muscle mass ratio is not ideal. So the body type is not good for thermoregulating. That's number one. Number two, thinking about, again, the microenvironment. You got all this gear on. You got pads on top of your body. You got a helmet on top of your head, for goodness sake. No chance or limited chance for convection. All these, and they're sprinting and stopping. Again, all these factors would lead you to conclude, yeah, you're probably going to have to sweat a lot if you're an athlete in that sport. Now, one more thing I wanted to focus on here, just to make it as crystal clear as possible, what the differences in sports, and especially as it pertains to fluid, and how I told you at the beginning, this is all very, very individualized. What sport has the lowest sweat rate? Water polo. And swimming itself is also very, very low. Now, why would, this is not too hard of a question, I don't think. Why would swimming or water polo generate the lowest sweat rates? Because, yeah, why? You are literally in water. Remember what I said. Look, the reason why we sweat is to evaporate and dissipate heat. That's the reason for sweating. If you are exercising, literally, in a pool of water, why would I need to sweat? There's no need for sweating here. My body generates heat and says, oh, look, all this water is around me. Water conducts heat 26 times faster than the air. I'm in the pool. I'm going hard. I'm working. I'm generating tons of heat. However, I can just shoot into the water. This is why I say you really got to individualize this. My question off the top, is hydration important? That depends who you're talking to, really. If I put it this way, if I was talking to a group of swimmers, as I've done many, many times, and I had like an hour to talk to them, I don't think I'm going to fit in hydration on my list. It's not don't drink. I'm not saying don't drink, but like for your sport, this is not the determining factor. You don't need to worry about sweating and dissipating heat. You're in the water. That's why you see such low sweat rates in these sports. Is there a question here? Yep. I would say there is a way to do it. And I'm going to show you in a second. So you wouldn't need to measure it. You're right. It's a good question. Just try to conceptualize, well, how are you measuring sweat if you're in the water? There's a very easy way to do this, which, by the way, you should all do for yourself. You are your own subject and all this stuff we're learning in NFS 302. You should measure your own sweat rate for sure to find out where you rank. Maybe you're a big sweater. Maybe you're a small sweater. Who knows? But there's a very easy way to measure your sweat rate, and I'll show you in a second. All right. Let's start talking now about whether or not this whole concept is so bad. Certainly made out to be bad, this whole concept of being dehydrated. So folks, we're going to dive, no pun intended. We're going to dive headlong into the literature about exactly how bad it is to be, quote unquote, dehydrated. And I think I've kind of tipped you off a little bit. I've given you some foreshadowing, but I'm going to say for certain activities, certain sports, certain situations, yeah, I'm on board. It's not a great idea to be dehydrated, but depending on what you're talking about, maybe, just maybe, this whole concept is somewhat overblown in terms of its importance. Another question? No? Okay. All right. Let's start here, shall we? Let's start here. Trying to get into our brain. Well, how bad is dehydration? And what level of dehydration are we talking about being bad? This is, I love these old studies, by the way. Look at this title of this thing. Physiology of Man in the Desert. What year was this? 1947. Can't do this kind of stuff anymore. Ethics committees would never, ever get it past go. But back in 1947, these guys volunteered to go out in the desert and basically kill themselves in the name of science. Terrible stuff from an ethical point of view. But from a physiological point of view, man, this is interesting what these volunteers subjected themselves to. So they go out in the desert like Pablo Valencia, and they measure what happens to them when they don't drink for a long, long time. Here's the thing I'm going to focus on to get us started here. Okay. So first of all, the water, if you lose, I'll read it out word for word. If 5 or 10% of the body weight is lost by dehydration, okay, so hang in there, 5 to 10%, the loss can be made good quickly and without any lasting ill effects. That's 5 to 10% level of dehydration. Now, they do go on to say, if you lose like 20%, now maybe you're headed towards catastrophe. So 20% is very, very bad. We can all agree. But even these authors said, look, if you go out in the desert and just like deprive yourself, you can record like pretty big levels of dehydration without too catastrophic outcomes. In the modern day, okay, let's fast forward up to the modern day times, and you can put an asterisk by this slide too. This seems to be the gold standard nowadays for determining dehydration. So if someone is dehydrated or not, the answer to the question would be, have they lost 2% of their body weight because of this activity? Oh, and by the way, if it wasn't clear, when I was talking about 5 to 10%, 20%, what I mean is losing that amount of your body weight in fluid, okay? So if you're at a level of 2% dehydration, this is kind of the gold standard where people think that's probably sufficient to qualify as dehydrated. 2% of your body weight lost, which is what I was saying, folks, you can measure this very, very easily. So the question about measuring how much you sweat in the pool, you can measure it fairly easily because you're not actually measuring while you're performing. It's very straightforward. Weigh yourself before you do your activity, and you'll weigh X. Do the activity, takes an hour, let's say. Then weigh yourself after, and if you weigh 2% less than X, you following this? They could say, well, you dehydrated yourself during that activity. You follow that? Now, if you want to complicate things, it's only slightly more complicated. You can say, well, what if I want to drink during my activity? That's fine too. You just got to measure that as well. And the math works out very, very nicely. Basically, 1 liter of water equals 1 kilo. So the math is just, again, a physics thing. The density works, not exactly, by the way, but for our intents and purposes, it's basically the same. For every liter of fluid that you lose, that should weigh exactly 1 kilo. Makes perfect sense. So if I weigh 75 kilos before my activity, I go for a run, now I'm 74 kilos. Safe to assume you lost 1 liter or 1 kilo of fluid during that activity. Okay, so now that we've got that in our heads, we know these numbers, okay? 2% is the cutoff for dehydration. Because we know that if you get to that level, all these kind of bad things happen here. Look at all these bad things. It sounds very, very bad. Decreased aerobic performance, decreased cognitive function, decreased ability to regulate heat, cardiac drift. It's in bold, terms that are bold, that are important. What does that mean? Heart rate increases in the absence of exercise intensity. Doesn't sound very good. So my heart rate just keeps going up, doing the same exercise, but my heart's beating faster and faster. That doesn't sound good for performance. So getting to a level whereby you've lost 2% of your body weight in fluid, that means these things are likely to happen. Sounds terrible, right? Sounds terrible? Well, I'd say it sounds terrible for certain sports, maybe not all sports. Now this has failed me. Come off it. Seriously, folks. No. There we go. All right. This is the table I was looking at. This is a really cool study that summarized all the individual studies that have been done on this topic. What effect does 2% dehydration have on performance in these sports? And for the sake of simplicity, okay, follow along here, you could break it down to what we'll call endurance sports versus strength sports. Underneath the endurance sport category, we're talking about like going for a 5K run, marathon running, all those things that you could figure out would quite fairly be categorized as endurance sports. However, the other kind of sports that we'll call strength sports, like for example, how about my ability to do a 1 rep max bench press? What effect does being 2% dehydrated have on that kind of stuff, like a 1 rep max kind of, or like a really short sprint, shall we say, those kind of stuff. And we see that the sports that we'll call endurance sports, no question, dehydration plays a role here. Let me start with the really, really dehydrated studies. So in the studies where athletes got up to like 7% dehydration, remember the cutoff is 2, but you can get very dehydrated. Let's say you got to 7% dehydration. Okay, how does that affect performance in these sports? Well, in endurance sports, it affects them at the rate of 100% negatively. 2 for 2. No question, 7% dehydration. Sorry, yeah, I'm on board. That's very, very bad for endurance performance. However, look at this other thing here. If you're talking about the strength sports, 1 out of 7 had a negative outcome. In other words, 6 out of 7 times didn't make any difference. Being 7% dehydrated for like strength-based stuff. If we go down the table, it gets a little bit less convincing. So our 2% cutoff for endurance sports is now still like half, give or take. But again, where's that meme I showed you? Is the glass half empty or half full? Depends how you want to look at it. At the level of 2% dehydration, you could guess maybe half the time, shall we say, an endurance performance is going to negatively suffer. But the strength ones, like, okay, 8 out of 60, like it doesn't affect strength at all. In other words, if I'm going to do a 1 rep max bench press, does that make a difference if I'm 2% dehydrated walking into the room to press an enormous weight one time? The answer, I don't think it makes any difference. Endurance stuff, yes, I'm on board. I'm on board. But for other types of sports, I don't think this is as big a deal as it's made out to be. All right. Let's do some more real practical stuff here. I'm going to tackle this great question. Oh my goodness, all the great questions are being answered. Is it okay to drink to my level of thirst? Can I use thirst as an indicator to judge if I'm dehydrated? Yes or no? What's the answer to that question? And the answer is it's actually a little bit more complicated than we can just say one way or the other outright. I am going to attempt to tackle that. But again, I might say the standard answer is, oh, you can't go by your thirst level. You might hear things like, oh, like you're dehydrated like 2 hours before your body kicks in and realizes you're thirsty. You might have heard that stuff before. Folks, I'm going to spoil the surprise here and say, actually, I think there is some certain situations where drinking to thirst is actually a fairly decent way to go about gauging your hydration level. So more on that in a second. What I'm going to show you now is, again, something very, very practical and useful to gauge whether or not you or your clients or your friends or whoever is or isn't dehydrated. Okay, I'm showing you this Venn diagram. So a 3-piece Venn diagram. You might have seen these things before. It's called a Venn diagram because it has these three things, 3 categories we're going to evaluate, which each on their own, okay, folks, might not tell us so much fantastic information, but put the 3 together, and if you wind up in this space here in the middle, if you're 3 for 3, now we're on to something. Now we can tell some things. So if you get 3 check marks in each, now we can probably tell, yeah, probably you're dehydrated. Okay, let's talk about each of them. Number 1, we're going to talk about body weight. Then we're going to talk about your urine color. Believe it or not, that's a thing. And finally, we'll get to this great question. Is it ever okay to just drink to thirst? All right, talking about weight. Here's how this works. Might blow your mind yet again here with this piece of information. Nobody in this room weighs 150 pounds. Are you aware of that? Nobody in this room weighs 113 pounds. Nobody weighs 199 pounds. What am I getting at? Human body weight fluctuates by about 1% every single day. Somebody asked me, hey, Dennis, how much do you weigh? I say, about 179, 181. That's the answer. You fluctuate within a range based on a variety of factors. So nobody has a specific number that they weigh. Here's how I would do this if I was you. If I was interested in figuring out my daily hydration status and my sweat rate and all that stuff. Okay, so you got to weigh yourself every day. Okay, first thing in the morning is a great idea. Get on the scale and you say, okay, today I weighed X. Okay, if I get on the scale tomorrow and I'm 3% less than X, you might conclude, I might not have drank enough yesterday. Might be a tip-off that you didn't drink enough. You can expect a 1% fluctuation and say, oh, that's normal, no problem whatsoever. But if you get on the scale 2 days in a row and it's a bigger difference than that, like you might be, I don't know, 4% less than you were yesterday. Okay, you didn't lose that in fat is what I'm telling you folks. 24 hours, you didn't burn off that much fat in 24 hours. What you lost is fluid. You might want to pay attention to that. Might want to keep an eye on that. This is how you would gauge this first of the 3 items in the Venn diagram. And again, as I told you, if I was you folks, I'd do it for my exercise. I'd figure out, am I a high sweater or am I a low sweater? Do it before you do your exercise and you get all your own personal information. Fun stuff, I think. All right, how about number 2? Urine color. Again, this is stuff that you hear, myths and things about. Actually, it's not a bad way to gauge your hydration status, especially when you couple it with a couple of other things that in total put together a picture. So you simply you observe your urine, and the color of the urine can tell you things. Generally speaking, it's the color of apple juice or lighter. And if that's the case, then you can say, well, I probably am fairly well hydrated. There is charts and things for this. This is a photo that I took actually. Inside, true story, inside the locker room of Team Canada's national female hockey team. So we were there on a conference. They gave us a tour of all their facilities. Think how cool this is. In the bathroom stall, okay, so the girls have this on the wall. So their job is, because they're looking at it for every nook and cranny, every advantage they can have, don't become dehydrated, girls. You're high-level athletes. They got this on the wall of the bathroom. So the girls pee, and they're supposed to observe the pee. And if it's these colors, then you're okay or you're not okay. If your pee is this color, by the way, I suggest you go to the hospital instantaneously. But if it's apple juice or lighter, you get a check mark. I'm probably not dehydrated. Okay. There's even apps for this. Some of you, I know you're all very keen, astute practitioners of sports science. I bet some of you have this app. You're out there monitoring your own pee color. I know you are. Anyway, if you're so interested, all kinds of tools you can use to gauge the second of the 3 things in the Venn diagram. And the final one, thirst. I'm still going to wait. Can I do that? Can I tease you for a bit longer? I am going to talk about whether or not it's okay to drink to thirst, but I got a whole slide and a whole spiel about that later. But suffice to say, to tip you off a little bit, it's here. It's part of this 3-step process for determining your hydration status. So I'll say, probably there is something to be had or to be told about gauging your level of thirst. Okay. We'll skip over this. That's just the nuts and bolts from the position stand on fluid replacement and exercise. You can check it out later because it's more fun to talk about case studies. More fun to bring this to life. This whole concept, folks, about dehydration and whether or not it might be the most horrendous possible thing that you ever heard of. Let's work through this together, shall we? I got 3 case studies for you, and you can think about them, and we'll see if we come to the same conclusions about this very important question. Well, how bad is it to be dehydrated? Shall we? Let's go along here. All right. This is, for the first time in our course, we're meeting this individual, by the way. Have we met him before? Was he here? He was. Yes, you're right. See, I've never introduced him live. That's my problem. It's our old friend, then. It's our old friend, Average Joe. We've met him before. We'll meet him many times in our course together. Let's investigate whether or not Average Joe should be worried about this whole concept of dehydration, shall we? And if again, just for a reminder, Average Joe is, did I give him did I give you his whole background? I forget. He's an accountant. Are you aware of that? He's 50. He's an accountant. He has 3 kids. He likes never mind. He's a guy who doesn't like exercise. He's just exercising because he knows it's healthy. He's trying to accumulate the minutes. That's all he wants to do. He's not an athlete, but he is 99% of the exercisers in the world. 1% are the elite athletes you watch on TV at the Olympics. This is it. This is the average exerciser. He is average Joe. You tell me, is dehydration a really, really big concern for him? Let's give him some more information here. Let's say, okay, average Joe, he can do a sweat rate of 1 liter per hour. I'm choosing this for 2 reasons. Number one, that's a very reasonable sweat rate for an average individual. If you can do 1 liter of sweat per hour, quite typical, I would say. Also, the math works out very easy. And let's say he weighs 150, okay? Following this? Now, if that's the case, unless my math is wrong, which I don't think it is, average Joe would have to work out for 1.5 hours before even hitting the 2% dehydration mark. Do you hear that, folks? The average Joe would have to work out for 1.5 hours before even hitting the 2% dehydration mark. Is this a big deal for him? Why on earth would he care? He wouldn't care for a whole variety of reasons, not the least of which is he's never going to work out for 1.5 hours to begin with. He's trying to get in there and out as quick as he can. He goes to see his personal trainer. He shows up 10 minutes late. He stretches for 10 minutes at the end. It's like 40 minutes of exercise, and he's out the door. He's not going to, I feel like I'm going to push myself for 90 minutes today. The average Joes are never going to do this. Even if they did, even if he did push himself that length of time, he's now only hitting the 2% dehydration level. Assuming, by the way, don't get me wrong, I never said you shouldn't drink, right? Drink, water especially is wonderful. Don't drink. But assuming he shows up to the workout fairly decently hydrated, the math doesn't lie, right, folks? It takes him an hour and a half to get to 2% dehydration. What are the negative consequences of being 2% dehydrated? Aerobic performance begins to suffer. Does he care? He didn't care to begin with. Now he's been doing it for 90 minutes. So he cares even less now. He's out the door. Not an issue for him. So this whole concept, I think, of dehydration being so ominous, I'm not buying it for everybody. Again, don't drink, but like just, drink your stuff, mostly water. But for the vast majority of exercisers, this is not going to be a huge deal. I don't think, unless someone cares to disagree with me. Now, how about this guy? How about this dude? Now we got a different story. Now we got a different thing to talk about. So you're looking at Reed Coolsat, one of the great marathon runners in Canada. Let's do the math for him, shall we? And see if this issue of being dehydrated is now of importance for him and people like him who do this for a living. I choose that term, again, very, very deliberately. All right, what's the math here? Let's say Reed weighs 65 kilos like all elite male marathoners weigh. And let's say if you're going to be an elite male marathon runner, you're going to do the thing in like 2 hours, 10 minutes, okay, give or take. 2 hours, 10 minutes. It will be a good time for argument's sake. All right. He's going to be 2% dehydrated by losing 1.3 kilos of fluid. Does that make sense? 1.3 liters per hour. Does that sound like a reasonable sweat rate? 1.3 per hour? Can anyone do that? That's very reasonable, especially on a hot day. Goodness. 1.3 liters per hour, very, very reasonable amount to lose. Now, here's the thing. If Reed or elite marathon runners like him are not paying attention to this, you've been going for an hour, you're at the 2% dehydration mark, and what do we know happens then? Performance begins to suffer. Cardiovascular performance begins to suffer. He is halfway done the race, and he's doing this for a living. He is performing, he's competing, he's trying to win this thing. If he doesn't pay attention to his fluid, he's not going to be an elite marathon runner, right? The math just works out very, very simply in this kind of a thing. Not for the average Joe, but if you're an elite endurance athlete, you could very easily get to a level whereby we know your performance is going to begin to deteriorate if you don't pay attention to your fluid. I got one more for you. One more example here. One more. Why is this happening? God almighty. This is bad drama, folks. I apologize. It's freezing up. There we go. All right, my third and final example. We'll take our last break of the day after this because this sets the stage for the last part of the lecture. All right, third and final example. How about your average Joe now wants to run a marathon? How about that situation? And that might happen. Why might that happen? Because it could be on someone's bucket list of things to do in life. They have no intention of winning the thing. They just want to compete. They want to go out there and say they finished. And by the way, talking about my availability heuristic, which I talked about in week number 1, the vast majority of people that do these marathons are not the Reed Coolsats of the world or the elite athletes. 99% of them are average Joes who are just there. There's like tens of thousands of people do marathons every year. They aren't all elites. They're average people trying to just check something off of life's bucket list. Here's what I would say. Folks, you got to be super, super careful in any kind of advice you might give to such a person. This group, this demographic is going to be very, very diversified in their fitness level, their body type, the time they're going to take to do the marathon. One commonality of that, though, by the way, is that they're going to be out there for a long time. And generally speaking, the longer you're out there, quite sensibly, the more opportunity for something very, very bad to happen. I told you before at the beginning of this lecture, if you're going to screw one thing up, don't screw up this. Your fluid, and especially as it pertains to the non-elite, average Joe saying, yeah, I'm going to do one of these, really impressive endurance type of activity. That's what I'm going to do. If you get this wrong, you could wind up gaining weight during the marathon. Think about that. Wrap your brain around that. You did a marathon, for goodness sake, and you wind up being heavier than you were when you started. Why? You got the fluid wrong. This ties in beautifully to my part about overhydration and our 2 case studies, which we're going to talk about and then go on our break. All right. So you were all on the edge of your seats wondering what happened to each of these 2 human beings. And once again, with all due respect, they are actual real-life people. In case you weren't here at the beginning or you forgot. So we have 2 situations, and we're going to talk about what happened in each. One of them was this character, Pablo Valencia, who at the turn of the 19th century was a gold prospector, gets lost in the desert. The other case study was modern-day Boston Marathon participant Cynthia Lucero. What happened to each? All right, let's talk about what happened to Pablo. It's a great story. Could be a movie. Could be a movie, folks. So Pablo was lost for 3 days when the search was abandoned. So Pablo's buddies knew he was lost, went out and looked for him, did so for 3 days, and they said, ugh, I think Pablo's probably dead by now. We're just going to call things off. Pablo said, thanks a lot, you no good so-and-sos. He crawled back into camp 5 days after that. So now we're talking 8 days where Pablo was out in the desert. They say he walked/crawled like 160, 150 kilometers. He stopped producing urine after a certain number of days, which he had been drinking because he had absolutely no more fluid left after his 7.6 liter canteen was finished. He found some bugs along the way, some scorpions or whatnot that he ate. Not much hydration can be accrued from eating a scorpion, by the way, but Pablo tried. 8 days later, he crawls back in, and they say that he was he looked less than human, right? He's crawling in. He's lost how much weight did he lose? They said like 40 pounds or something, I think. Yeah, 40 pounds. He was lost, and his eyes are sunken into his head. He's delirious. But Pablo survives. He lives. So you know where the story is going here. The moral of this story that I'm trying to say, folks, would be summarized as this, okay? The idea of the ultimate catastrophic outcome occurring because of dehydration is really quite hard. Like, look at 8 days in the desert, and the guy survives. We are geared, we are good at, we are used to, again, from an evolutionary point of view, of dealing with drought and famine. Never mind the fact that these mechanisms, talking about thirst, the mechanisms would kick in whereby, like, you're compelled to seek out fluid or seek out food. To dehydrate yourself requires really extraordinary circumstances. The one situation where it does happen in the modern world, I will say, is, once again, I'll give a shout out to nursing home environments, where if the human being is incapable of moving, they're incapacitated, they can't move, and they're left by themselves horrendously for days on end, and they can't physically get water for themselves, then yes, you might get dehydrated. But otherwise, folks, we're talking like a series of events that are very, very unlikely, I think, to befall someone, whereby the ultimate tragic outcome is going to happen. Now, Cynthia, with all due respect, she passes away in the Boston Marathon on this day. Why? And what's her story? Okay. The story is this. She heard, I would say, the notion, the erroneous piece of advice, just drink as much as you can, was a piece of advice that got bandied about, certainly back in those days. I think now it's getting less so. However, there was a notion that you really can't drink too much. Dehydration is the ultimate thing to be avoided, so just drink as much as you possibly can to avoid dehydration. But that kind of advice, folks, could have tragic consequences. Here's Cynthia's story. So at mile 19, she starts to lose control of her legs, feels rubber-legged. This is an emergency. It's been identified now. She's suffering. So they say, what's wrong? And she says, look at this quote, tragic and heartbreaking, really. I feel dehydrated. No, Cynthia, you're not dehydrated. You're the opposite of dehydrated. But because no one knows about overhydration, not a thing that's talked about. All we know is dehydration. She says, I must be dehydrated. But if you look at how much she drank, for goodness sake, the estimate is she drank 1.2 liters of fluid per hour while she was out on the course. Because I told you, all this stuff is readily available. And she puts 1.2 liters of fluid into her body during the race. Multiply that by how many hours she was out there, 5 hours, give or take. 10 liters of fluid consumed in that amount of time. This is not, this is serious stuff, folks. Anyway, her blood sodium, which is a key metric we're going to talk about after the break. You can measure this stuff very, very easily. Your blood sodium is the main metric for determining your hydration status. And hers was 113. As we'll see after the break, that is too low. That is not good. That is way, way too low. Diagnosis is exercise-associated hyponatremic. Too low sodium, encephalopathy associated with exercise, and tragically, Cynthia passes away. Not because of dehydration, folks, because of drinking too much fluid, overhydration. And after we have our last break of the day, we will come back and finish the lecture talking about overhydration. So take 10, folks, and then come back. You say convert. Are you talking about Zoom?
So you see the little pause button? Yeah, so what you can do is actually stop sharing and then stop the recording. Stop it.
Okay, do that.
So you can stop the recording and then it says, are you going to save it on the cloud or on the
The cloud that was set up to save on, I think.
are you sure you want to start recording? to the cloud, so you're starting to train. So yeah, just do that.
Recording stopped.
Once the break is over, just start recording again. So what is gonna happen is gonna give you right now it's gonna give you 2 separate videos.
Okay.
And that's gonna be a little quicker for it to convert.
Gotcha.
Again, it's 1 hour, 3 1 hours versus
Right.
1 3 hours.
Yeah. That's better.
Yeah, and also when people come in to ask questions, it's gonna be a bunch of noises, and it's gonna be also quicker to upload. So
We'll pause during the pauses.
yeah, you could do that.
Okay. Makes sense. I did stop my own.
Oh, you're just not. So the other thing that I wanted to ask, going back to saying examples, I love examples, which is why it's complicated. So you were talking about the pillars of power availability and the fact that participants to trade and all that. So obviously, if you need to be higher, you would be more cards.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
one.
yeah.
And then less than intensity, you need more cards.
That's fair.
Sounds good. And then going back to the meal that you're having before, so let's say you know that it's going to be high intensity, like doing the 400 meter sweat. So you want to have a lot of carbs in the meal that's before.
Yeah, I would say a carb meal before that would be a good idea.
Would be good. It will not interrupt with like digestion or performance.
We have a whole lecture about this. We're going to talk about timing. There's just a few, you are right. It is a consideration, but there's a few very easy tricks, shall we say, to avoid that kind of a thing becoming an issue. So they say 3 to 4 hours before, give the time to digest. They say if you do low fat, low fiber, these are tricks. But yeah, if you were going to do a 14-minute swim, try to win an Olympic medal, I think it'd probably be a good idea if you could, depending on the time. What if it's like 9 o'clock? And then you can't wake up. So there's always practical consideration. But say if it was at 7 o'clock at night, I would definitely have a carbohydrate meal 3-4 hours before. We're going to talk about that.
We're not going to talk about that?
Sure.
Oh, we are.
Oh, absolutely. It's $1 million question.
And you also mentioned that carb availability is dependent on your blood concentration. How do you build up blood concentration with more training?
Yes, that helps. So, yeah, combination of the training for endurance. How should I say this? Training for endurance sets you up to store more amounts of glycogen. Your body will adapt. Training adaptation. Your body will say, why is this person making me run all these distances? What's going on here? We don't like this. We don't like being depleted after this. The strategy is we're going to build up so good that when we do this again, we're going to be ready. So the training sets the stage for storing higher levels of glycogen. Now you got to eat properly too. So you have the appropriate amount of carbohydrates. You might do something like carb load. We're going to talk about that. You wouldn't necessarily do it for all sports. But if your sport is an endurance sport, you probably would do that. And so then the idea would be when you arrive on the day of the event, you got to perform now. I want to have lots of glycogen. And you would have, they're going to biopsy and compare this athlete to the average Joe. Well, you got twice as much glycogen. You got way more glycogen than a non-trained person who wasn't doing nutritional interventions to get this result. I have twice as much glycogen. I'm a better specimen for endurance than you are. One of the reasons I got way more glycogen to draw.
So basically for the swimmer, because obviously they're using the upper body, they would have to train their upper body.
What they would do is they would swim.
Swim.
Yeah. Because what you've chosen is kind of a more complicated sport than just running. Running is always basically the most straightforward, or cycling. The outcome of a swimming race is not dependent solely on physiology. It's important, but you got to know the stroke, right? This is a technique. This is a very intricate technique. I got to learn this. And I might be a better specimen than you, but for some reason you got the biomechanics. You turn your hand like this, and I did like this. That makes a huge difference. Think about it. Nothing to do with nutrition. That's the technique. So swimming was more
also training, it's fun, it's also integrity. I mean, in the case of swimming, it doesn't make sense to gaining more energy or taking anything in between, but during, let's say, because it's endurance and I mean, energy drinks are going to get to that. But in terms of core availability, is that a good?
It depends on the week. I'm going to talk about that exactly. That's coming on. Certain situations, yes. Some, no. And we're going to talk about it exactly.
There was a slide, unfortunately, I can't see it right now. In this particular slide, you were referring to for 1 liter of oxygen, there is 7.7% more energy.
So math is, so this is how much fat.
Yeah.
And it's less than.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. So fat plus the carbs. So
You get less energy if you're burning fat.
You get less energy.
Yes. Less energy is liberated if the only thing you burn is fat. Versus you only burn carb, you get, I think it worked out, if I did the math right, 7.7% more energy available. So that's obviously huge for certain sports.
It's a matter of using the energy produced from the fat source
Correct.
versus the
Right.
carbs.
Yes.
Because we always learn physiology that fat has a more source than the carbs. That clears it up.
Okay. No problem. Nice. How are you? In the middle of the run?
Yeah, like you can't wait or something.
Oh. I guess you wouldn't. You wouldn't have time to actually pinpoint.
So I guess in the case of the she
Yeah, misinterpreted the signals, and she didn't do what I'm going to say she should have done, which is right, to her level of force.
you can tell that.
I'm going to say that the outcome of not doing that is much worse. Like if she just said, "Do I feel thirsty?" No. Okay, let's keep going. She wouldn't be dead. But she had it in her head that I gotta drink as much as you can. Drink as much as I'm going to show. So you're told directly, drink as much as you can. So, yeah, so this is what she's doing. She's just pounding. She doesn't know anything about overhydration. She knows about dehydration. She's just, I'm dehydrated. So they find out when they draw the blood and they say your sodium is 113. That's not dehydration. That's overhydration. But at the time, yeah, you got to judge your signals. Thirst. That's okay. Mm-hmm. 5. Mm-hmm. Good question. So it would be, I can't really answer like that. I would say, depending on the sport, you're going to need to have higher sweat rate, most likely. Like for tennis, you want to play tennis well, you're going to probably have to be able to generate a high sweat rate. The fact that we discussed, as opposed to swimming, because the nature of the sport leads to I don't need to sweat. So sport specific. What's needed at this time? If I'm playing football in the sun with all these pads on, or I'm playing tennis in the sun for 2 hours, sprinting something, you better be able to sweat. No problem. Likelihood is, what are they going to do? Are they going to tell people, you got to come back to Toronto from Japan for this final exam, this course you've been doing for 4 months, you got to get here? I don't see it. Well, I don't know. Like, I have no information. We'll all find ways to see what can. If they leave it up to the which they have kind of done to a certain degree, and I'm not going to decree that people must come. They said, don't do the hybrid stuff. They told us that. I'm not going to tell people must be here. Unless the university says, all exams are in person. If they say that, then that's what it's going to be. It seems to me that would be unlikely. Unlikely.
Recording in progress.
All right, folks, we're going to try to finish up. Can someone tell me what is the actual time of day? You got to be joking. Is it 11:36? All right, we got 24 minutes to do all this. I can do it, don't worry. I did. All right, folks, we're back for the last 26 minutes. I have 26 minutes to talk about overhydration. Now, I told you the story of Cynthia Lucero and what led her to disaster. I think this had a lot to do with it, actually. This is from the position stand of the American College of Sports Medicine that predated, okay, the new position stand. But it's all in the wording. All in the wording. This was the abstract, okay, and nobody reads the whole paper. They read the abstract and take the points out of it. Point number 3. Look at the wording. Direct quote. During exercise, athletes should start drinking early and at regular intervals in an attempt to consume fluids at a rate sufficient to replace all the water lost through sweating or consume the maximal amount that can be tolerated. That was the wording. And like the elite athletes of the world knew that was not the case, by the way. If you're an elite marathon runner, you plow through the thing in 2 hours and 10 minutes and you don't replace your fluids. It's certainly to the same degree that you lose them. You're conscious of dehydration, that's for sure, but like this was just non-attainable. And people like Cynthia, I think, read this or heard this through the media or whatnot, and the results could have been very, very catastrophic. Now, this thing's not moving again, honestly, folks. Oh, my goodness. Oh. Whoops. There we go. Okay. More about hyponatremia. I'm taking this from this was a conference, the latest conference convened on this exact topic of hyponatremia. And this just summarizes some of the main points about this condition. Essentially, look, there's many studies, dozens of which outline incidences of this. It's hard to pinpoint exactly how common it is. However, it's been directly linked with at least 14 deaths since 1981. All of them a tragedy. All of them a tragedy. As in the person woke up that morning, totally healthy, functional, physically fit human being, and did not live to the end of the race because of this issue, exercise-associated hyponatremia. Okay, here's how you can avoid this, okay? And I'm going to answer the question as I promised I would. Is it ever okay to drink to thirst? Is it ever okay to drink to thirst? And I'm going to say the answer is sometimes. I got 4 scenarios here to work through whereby, again, it's kind of like the Venn diagram. You do your check marks, okay? Does this apply to me? Yes. Does this apply to me? No. And there's 4 of them, okay? So 4 criteria you might use to evaluate whether or not it is a good idea for you or the person you're counseling to just simply drink if you happen to feel thirsty, okay? Number 1, if you're heavy versus light. If you are a larger individual, then that means your body type is less suited for thermoregulating. Okay, that would be the first criteria. Second criteria, the weather, if it's hot or if it's cold. If it's hot outside, you might need a plan in place to monitor your hydration status, know how much fluid you're going to ingest. If it's cold outside, this becomes less relevant. And if that's the case, then maybe the answer is, look, if I feel thirsty, I'm going to start drinking. Third criteria, fast pace versus slow pace. The real Reed Coolsats of the world, the elite marathon runners who are running fast, you better believe it, they have a specific plan in place. They know exactly how many mils they hope to consume at different time intervals. They have a plan. They are not winging it out there and going by thirst. If you're like Cynthia Lucero and you're just doing the marathon simply to finish it, and you're going to be out there for 4 or 5 hours, you know what's going to happen to you? Your brain, look, if I don't run a marathon, my brain's going to tell me, look, you're thirsty at some point in the next 4 hours. You should drink something. If that's the case, then I think you're well suited just to follow the advice. When I feel thirsty, I'm just going to drink something. And the fourth and final thing there, if the opportunity is limited versus whether or not the opportunity might be abundant. Best example of this is, I had a client one time who was, what do you call it? One of these like adventure racers. You know what I'm talking about? Like he's going off to a jungle somewhere in South America to do a race through the jungle, which is totally, to me, what a crazy idea, but this is what he's into. So if that's the case, then you're going to be doing it like 24 hours running through a jungle. Who knows where the water is going to be? My goodness, you better have a plan in place. Don't wait till you're thirsty. Well, I'm thirsty and I'm 10 hours out from the next check post here in the jungle. That would be a bad piece of advice. So if there's limited opportunity for hydration, then yes, get a plan in place. If there's tons of opportunity, like there is in every road race conducted in North America, like Cynthia had, I think then you're okay simply to go by your thirst mechanism. So folks, that would be my answer to the question, is it ever okay to drink to thirst? The answer is yes, sometimes, depending on these kind of factors, these 4 factors. I'm going to plow through some of this pretty fast here. Okay, so I told you sodium is the key metric, okay? And Cynthia said she felt dehydrated. I've been trying to steer you away from your feelings, which is the opposite of what the world is telling you, but we have this thing called science. We can measure stuff. What a concept. Never mind feeling dehydrated or overhydrated. I can stick a needle in your arm, pull out some blood, and measure the sodium. And we know what's the appropriate levels here. It might have been a previous slide. I missed it. But anyway, if your sodium is less than 135, that's considered too low. And I can tell you from personal experience, the idea, folks, of seeing a sodium level that is too high, okay, so it's above the reference range, that happens very rarely. I'm speaking anecdotally, but I can tell you, I can count on one hand the number of times I've looked at lab work and said, oh, your sodium's too high. Super, super rare. The opposite is much, much more common. Your sodium is too low. And the cutoff we had was 135. We can measure this objectively. If you're below that, your sodium's too low. What was Cynthia Lucero's? 113. Now we're getting dangerously low. There's another electrolyte that we do need to talk about. One, by the way, lives inside the cell. One lives outside the cell, the intracellular electrolyte being potassium and the extracellular being sodium. This is just some of the metabolism at work here. The opposite problem exists with potassium. People in this part of the world are eating too much sodium and not enough potassium. So you might